Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Hello, all you citizens of the world. It's time for another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This one's going to be a little different. My daughter got married this past weekend, and I'm on the road with my pal Gordon Thompson, and we're driving around southern Illinois, central Illinois. Right now we're in, I think, a town called Watsonville. I'm not quite sure if that's right. But we are having a good time. We went down to Manconda, been through Carbondale, driving around, went through a lot of small towns, back roads. And so this week we're going to have a couple of choices that our engineer producer Hal James has put together from earlier shows. So we'll be back next week with some new guests, but I hope you enjoy some of these highlights from earlier times and keep doing good in the world. All you citizens of the world, welcome back to Live from the Heartland. I'm really glad to bring on our next guest. It's Jonathan Alter. And the way this came to be was an encounter between Live from the Heartland producer Katie Hogan and Jonathan. I believe they met on a bus on their way to the Democratic Convention this past fall. And Katie gave me his card, which I lost. But when I was thinking about guests, I thought, well, I ought to try to find this fellow. And I did. And Jonathan Alter is a well-known author, done a recent book on Trump, did one on Jimmy Carter, Obama, etc. And I'm really glad you're here. So good afternoon to you, Jonathan.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael. It's good to be here.
We got a lot to talk about. It's not been a very good week on a lot of fronts. We see over in Hungary with Orban changing the constitution about LGBT people. We have a situation in El Salvador. We have Trump refusing to comply with the courts. But I thought rather than delve into that kind of stuff, we might want to start with one of your books. It's about Jimmy Carter. I believe it was called His Very Best, Jimmy Carter, A Life. And while I had disagreements with Carter at different times in my life, I really love and respect the man. I did see him once when I was in Nicaragua during the election. How about sharing a little bit about your experiences with Jimmy Carter?
Well, my first experience with him was when I was in college and I was an intern in the speechwriting office of the Carter White House. And I only met him once that summer, but this gives you an idea of how long ago it was, 1978. There was a speech that he was scheduled to give at a tobacco warehouse in North Carolina, and none of the real speechwriters wanted to write a pro-tobacco speech, so they made the intern do it. And then Carter, he didn't really give the speech, but he often would depart from the text, and he departed from the text to say, "I'm going to make cigarette smoking even safer than it already is." And John Fischetti, who some of your listeners might remember, was this fantastic cartoonist for the old Chicago Daily News and a family friend. He did a wonderful cartoon about Carter's speech where Carter had shot himself in the foot, So, which he did on rather frequent occasions when he was president. Um, but I agree with you that he was not only a decent man, but a much undervalued American president, and that's a lot of what my book is about. But I didn't encounter him again until I was a Newsweek columnist, and I went to a Habitat for Humanity site in the Bronx and talked to him briefly. I interviewed him for my column. This was right after Bill Clinton had tried to do this deal between Yasser Arafat and Israel, where they turned over 98% of what the Palestinians wanted, but Arafat at the last minute backed out of the deal. And so I was doing a column on that. And I remember that Carter told me that day, well, of course, Arafat had to back out because if he had signed the deal, he would have been assassinated, which I put in Newsweek and found kind of interesting. And then I didn't really have any contact with him for 15 years. And I'm in a book group in New York, and we were reading a book about Camp David, and somebody in our group knew Jason Carter, Jimmy's grandson, who had just run and come close to getting elected governor of Georgia, and he brought his grandfather with him to our book group. He was 90 years old, and after that evening, I'm thinking, my God, this guy was so sharp and so smart, not just on Camp David, but on human rights and the other things that we talked about. I'd like to do a book about him. And there has to be more to this guy than mediocre president, great former president. And it turned out that my editor was his editor at Simon & Schuster, and she smoothed the way for me. And so I had total access to him and his entire family. And I interviewed him altogether 13 times and like 6 or 7 times in person. And then I did some email interviews with him and phone interviews and was in touch with him regularly by email until he had a fall in 2019 and couldn't see anymore and do email. So, and then I last saw him when my wife and I went to his and Rosalind's 75th wedding anniversary, which was a couple of years ago, before they first she passed first, and then Jimmy Carter. And just in terms of my overall impression of him and the time I spent with him, I also built a house in Memphis for Habitat with Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, and I spent the day with them. One day getting hammering instructions from the former president. And my impression of him was pretty much the same as it had been that first night at the book club, which was just of an enormously intelligent person, extraordinarily knowledgeable on a very wide variety of subjects, who was surprisingly undefensive about his presidency and genial in our interactions, even though I knew that he could be snappish and prickly. And I only saw that a couple of times. One point when we were touring the Naval Academy, which he had attended, and he snapped at me when he thought I asked him a dumb question. But other than that, I just saw the genial, intelligent, decent Jimmy Carter and learned a lot from him. And I think spending time with him and pretty much everybody in his family, I did the first interview ever with Amy Carter. It let me draw a rounded portrait. Just one more thing, because I know you want to ask other questions. There was one moment when he became uncomfortable in our interviews, even though I asked him a lot of hard questions. And that was when we were talking about the 1970 campaign for governor of Georgia, where he played the race card. He didn't say anything explicitly racist, but he said that he would welcome George Wallace to come over from Alabama and address the state legislature, which he never invited him because he didn't like Wallace. But he did other things, and I was questioning him about this, and he said, I never claimed to be part of the civil rights movement. And then we talked about how on his first day as governor, just moments after taking the oath, he said the time for racial discrimination is over and became the Jimmy Carter that we know and love as governor of Georgia, integrating Georgia and then integrating the federal government of the United States, or moving it from tokenism to true diversity. But before that, when I was questioning him about his pandering, he said to me, "Are we done talking about this yet?" And I said, "President Carter, not quite yet. I have a few more questions on this." But other than that, and even that was done in a relatively genial fashion. My experience with him was delightful.
Well, on another note, they have a different president now, and one that I don't think has any redeeming qualities. We're clearly in a crucial time. We're confronting an ideological administration that really exudes cruelty and evil.
Yep.
You also did a book on the current president called American Reckoning: Inside Trump's Trial and Your Own. How about a little bit on that? And that'll take us into talking about the current situation with the current orange-haired president.
Okay. So I didn't want to write any kind of a book about Trump. And actually, I found during the 5 years I was working on his very best, the Jimmy Carter biography, Carter provided me a vacation from Trump. So he couldn't occupy, live rent free in my brain because Jimmy Carter occupied the premises. But then, at a certain point, I realized, look, I mean, I owe it to my readers on Old Goats, which is my Substack newsletter, and to readers in general to bear witness. And so I was able to obtain a credential for the Trump felony trial, the Stormy Daniels trial. I was one of the only people who was in the courtroom every day. That trial was untelevised. If it had been televised, Donald Trump never would have been reelected. And I felt like because I had been able to get this credential that I really had to lean into this. And so I started keeping a diary, and my book is partly my trial diary. And people might go, "Oh, well, he won anyway. They didn't hold him accountable just because he got convicted." But actually, the judge held him accountable almost every day in the courtroom, not just by citing him for contempt of court, which if it had been any other president would have been a huge story, but with Trump was not even the biggest story of the day. But, a lot of really, really negative stuff about Trump came out at that trial. And I knew that people wouldn't go back to the transcripts. And even though I was covering it for the opinions section of the New York Times and other people were writing about it a lot, I felt like all of us missed a huge amount about what it actually felt like to be in that courtroom, watch Stormy Daniels pour a bucket of slop over Donald Trump's head every day, with him being unable to reply and having to sit in the court and listen to all of that when he wasn't asleep. So, a lot of the book is about that, but the first part of the book is really about Chicago. It's a mini memoir of my growing up and coming of age as a journalist and various things that happened to me that influenced my life as a journalist. Most significantly, when Martin Luther King came to our house on the North Side when I was 8 years old, and delivered a kind of a mini "I Have a Dream" speech in our living room. It was a fundraiser to try to raise money for an event that he held at Soldier Field, and he was feuding with Mayor Daley at the time, as you might remember, Michael. And um, so this had an enormous impact on me, and I became, at age 8 years old, I'm absorbing the daily news and the Sun Times. We didn't take the Tribune for obvious reasons in those days, and this is what sort of made me a journalist. And then the other, just very quickly, the other experience in my family that was very influential on my development as a journalist happened 9 years before I was born, and that is that my mother, my late mother, Joanne Alter, who was the first woman elected in Cook County as commissioner of the Metropolitan Sanitary District, and
Ah,
she went on to run for lieutenant governor and other offices, but became maybe better known as founding the WITS program, the largest tutoring program in the Chicago housing projects. But when she was the first person in her family to go to college, and she was at Mount Holyoke, she was asked to give Eleanor Roosevelt a tour of campus. And so she did. And then afterward, Eleanor says, "Now, where do you live, Joanne?" And my mother says, I live, my dorm's over on the other side of campus. She said, "Oh, I must see your dormitory." And so the most famous woman in the world plops down on her bed and said, now, Joanne, tell me all about yourself. Where are you from? And how do you want to make a better world? And this
right.
just floored my mother, and it changed her life. And it, made her curious about other people, which is the foundation of journalism. So it was no surprise that 3 of her children became journalists. And she infected my father with this, and they got very involved in politics and the civil rights movement and my interest in politics. It comes, through that Eleanor Roosevelt experience that my mother had. And we now have the Joanne Alter Women in Politics lecture at the Chicago Humanities Festival every year, which is kind of an outgrowth of, you can draw a line from Eleanor Roosevelt to that. So that's the kind of thing that I write about in my book. And then I write about, I've interviewed 9 American presidents, either before, during, or after they left office. And I write about that some in my book as well, as trying to contextualize Trump and the evil, as you rightly put it, that he represents.
Well, you bring back some memories. I remember seeing Paul Douglas and Dr. King driving into Soldier Field. It was probably the summer of '66.
It was. That was the only time King was in Soldier Field.
Yeah, and then a couple years later, and I gave a speech at the Coliseum along with King and Dr. Spock. King was a real hero of mine. I mean, there were times I was critical, but he was something else.
Paul Douglas, that was the year he lost for the Senate, and that was my first political experience. My parents were very friendly with Paul Douglas, and I was at his campaign headquarters as he was losing to Chuck Percy. At that point, I had just turned 9, so I was a little older.
Well, you've been involved for a long time. I'm a little older than you. I go back to 1952. I remember going to Adlai Stevenson headquarters in my hometown to pick up some literature with my dad. Let's move to the current situation and Trump, et cetera. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on why, after the Republicans, or the Goppers, as I call them, GOP, they had a trifecta in the last election, and they really did have an opportunity to pursue a probably traditional conservative agenda. Why do you think they went for white supremacy, et cetera?
I mean, I don't see them going for white supremacy. I mean, there were quite a number of African Americans who voted for Trump,
Uh-huh.
I see them going for fascism.
Well, okay,
That's
that's
what we have. I mean, we are in the presence of an authentic American fascist, and he is following every part of the authoritarian playbook, and in some cases going quite a bit further than other authoritarians. And when you start spiriting people out of the country in the middle of the night without due process, that's what dictators and fascists do. So that's what we're experiencing right now. And why did all these Republicans go for it? Because they're not actually conservatives in any traditional meaning of that word,
right.
conservative. What they are is gutless politicians who know better, but in order to protect their political career, because they don't want to be, I don't know what, obscure lawyers back home, they are making common cause with this fascist who they think is the reason they're in office. And look, I mean, every American is facing the character test of their generation. Whether they believe in the ideals on which this country was founded or are willing to bend the knee to a would-be tyrant. And it's binary, and some people are in the cult of personality that Donald Trump has established, but most people are not. I mean, that base is 35% of the country, in total. And you can say, well, those people are lost. You can't argue with them. They're beyond hope of political redemption because they're in some sort of a cult. But everybody else, including the 15% of that got Trump to close to 50%, those are independents and Republicans who didn't like Kamala Harris for whatever reason, and they are facing a real character test. Like, what do they believe? And then these people at law firms who are bending the knee, they're flunking their character test. The president of Harvard just passed his character test.
No, he did great.
So it's binary. It's pass fail, and if you bend the knee, that way is tyranny. So everybody has to resist. Everybody has to ask themselves, what am I doing to help resist? I can't spend my whole life at it, but I can do a little bit. I can show up at one of these protests. I can, give a little bit of money to one of these organizations that's doing a great job in resisting. Whatever people can do, listen to this program. Community building is a very important part of resistance. Staying on top of it, not going, I can't stand this Trump news. You don't want to tell your grandchildren, what did you do? Well, I had to tune it all out. It was too upsetting for me. That doesn't work when we're accounting for ourselves in the future about what we did. So for my part, all I can do is bear witness in this trial, tell people about, there's a lot in my book about, Trump and his love for Nazis. People don't even know this, that, he had a book of Hitler's speeches that his ex-wife said he was reading years ago, right? And so, like, there's a lot that people think they know everything about him, but there's a lot about his evil that they don't know. And having met him, he threatened to sue me many years ago. I live in the New York area. So I've been, I interviewed him years ago. So, and then I saw him every day in court for 23 days. And one of the great pleasures of that, Michael, was every time the jury went in and out, 8 times a day, he had to stand and honor these ordinary people who were a jury of his peers. And then they convicted him on 34 counts, which was witnessing that being a few feet away from the foreperson when he says guilty, guilty, guilty 34 times was one of the highlights of my whole life.
Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of May 2nd. And it's really always a pleasure and an honor to have our next guest, the one and only Don Rose, on. So good day to you, Don, and thanks for coming on.
Always my fun.
Let's, a lot of the media these days are talking about Trump's first 100 days.
Yeah.
And, he's not getting high marks, but I'd love to know what your thoughts are about the first 100 days of this current kind of miserable situation we find ourselves in.
Well, I mean, they've been absolutely horrifying. It's an artificial mark. We talk about the 100 days based on some historic episode when somebody wrote about how productive Franklin D. Roosevelt's first 100 days were. And so we've always, ever since then, presidents have been marked on the 100 days, which don't mean much because they've got 4-year terms, and some of them move more slowly, and some of them I don't think anybody, even Roosevelt, has tried to enact as much. I mean, he has signed dozens and dozens and dozens of edicts, some of which, have the force of law, most of which have been devastating to, to the country, to the world, and nobody ever heard of teaming up with this guy from outside, Musk, the richest man in the world, given the chore of, in effect, trying to destroy the infrastructure of the United States government. Now, a couple of the things that in these edicts, the New York Times has a whole section on them today. It's just hundreds to think of what is the worst. A couple are very, very, very serious and will have to be decided by the Supreme Court. One is to abolish citizenship at birth in the United States. This has been in the 14th Amendment of the United States a long, long, long time. It's been tested in the courts before, but now he wants to do away with it. Now, I don't think he'll get away with it. It was immediately suspended by other courts. But the Supremes will have their final word about it. I'm fairly optimistic they're not going to overturn this one, although they have, overturned important things of the past, like Roe Wade. So it's always a little dicey, but you can feel good about this one, I think. The other that is also horrifying is his having declared that we are at war because two countries have sent their gangs to invade the United States. We're supposed to have MS-13 and the Aragua one, which is just an absurd idea, but utilizing that pretext as a war power, as he is, I should say, is able to declare this an emergency, expanding his war powers. And this is where he's throwing people out of the country. He's even talking about deporting citizens. It's a total mess. And the big problem here is that he has lifted habeas corpus, what we call due process. Due process is a fancy word for a trial or a hearing. And people who are non-citizens who live in the United States under various forms of visa or special permits, or people who came here from the Ukraine, for example, as special immigrants because of the Ukraine war. All of these things, he now claims the ability to throw out without due process. Well, that's, again, a very, very serious violation of the Constitution. And we've got to see how that holds up in the courts. If you can suspend due process for non-citizens, who knows but what the next move may be to abolish due process for Americans, legitimate, born here, long-time American citizens. Under the certain readings of what he has claimed, we are all vulnerable for deportation, theoretically. He has not tried to deport a full-term citizen yet, but I think he's going to test it out.
I think my wife came in last night and told me that Rachel Maddow was talking about U.S. citizens being deported. And I don't know if it was something that happened or not, but it certainly is scary. To counter this guy, we probably have to not only head to the streets, but also plan on turning out the vote. And you and I, we live in a wonderful state, the great state of Illinois, and we really have a pretty wonderful, it turns out, governor in Governor Pritzker. And he was up in New Hampshire just recently and gave a very fiery take it to the streets message and a challenge to Trump on every level. What's your take on him these days and his possible next moves?
Well, I think it's very clear that he's running for president. He's been talked about for a long, long time. For one reason, he's a governor of a major blue state, a major state. And the fact that he's a billionaire and could virtually finance his own campaign is an attractive idea. We would certainly raise money for him, but the fact that he's got that backup relieves one of the pressure and gives him an advantage in a primary against many of the others. Now, he has not been a particularly charismatic guy, but I think his presentations are improving. This speech he gave, I don't know who wrote it for him, but it was brilliant. Could have been written by the most progressive of us around, surprisingly so, which tells me something else. I am sure he did not undertake as woke a speech as this and as fighting, saying we've got to create a disturbance. He did not undertake that without, I'm sure, testing it very, very carefully. The one thing you can afford to do when you've got all that money is do some testing on any 100 words you want you want to speak, and it's a good sign to me that this approach is the one that he found acceptable, if not preferred. So that says that the public is more ready for these kind of fighting words, and that in itself is useful.
Well, John, as you know, I had on the show recently Jonathan Alter, and he, when talking about presidential candidates and elections, his response to the Pritzker question was he didn't think he'd be a good candidate because he's a billionaire. And despite the advantages of being a billionaire, he thought that might, since we're attacking the billionaires and the billionaire class these days, that wouldn't be so good. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think attacking the billionaire class in general goes very far. There's wonderful billionaires. George Soros, right. Look at our most wonderful billionaire around. So, oligarchs and so on. I think those things would fade away. You would decide as the campaign goes on exactly how to do it, and you would, obviously say there's good billionaires like George Soros and like J.B. Pritzker, and there's then there's the Musks of the world, and even let's remember our esteemed president himself is a billionaire, so on. The other part of the 100 days that I wanted to mention that is very, very important is that all of these destructive acts he's done, he's going to be causing deaths all over the world by cutting off foreign aid funds of various kinds, scientific research, to say nothing of the healthcare devastations that the Junior Kennedy is going to bring about. But the important thing is that the public has rejected these things almost unanimously. We've seen a slew of polls, I can't even think of how many, some trying using traditional language and some trying other approaches to how we feel about him. And the basic fact is that he is, by all of these polls show that on a approval basis, he is 10 points underwater. That in itself suggests that he will clearly lose the House at the next elections, unless he's able to recover some of those points. But as often happens, you go to everything he's done on immigration, on the economy. This is the first time he's ever come out underwater on the economy. People always somehow thought that he would be good for the economy, even if they didn't vote for him. So he has flunked every test of these horrors that he's done in the first 100 days, and it's likely that the descent will continue. I don't know how he can recover from it. Because he is still very much wed to the tariffs, which are a big part of his undoing. He believes in these tariffs, and although it's looking now like he was using them as a negotiating tool because they're so unpopular, I think he will try to invoke them or re-invoke them, and we're still, with all the pauses and special exceptions and this and that, the tariffs are still with us, and the economy is going to get worse. Most people think there will be a recession this year, and that will be death to him. With a recession, he may even lose the Senate. Uh, Not that you want to wish for a recession, but the Senate map looks pretty safe for him right now. But the House is extremely vulnerable, and that could stop further horrors from happening. But that's still almost a year away, more than a year away.
Let's keep talking the future elections. But we have a situation in Illinois where Dick Durbin, who's been our senator for a long time, just decided he's not going to run again at 80 years old. And he's number 2 in the Senate. And as you know, and you could shed some light on, there are a whole lot of people who are thinking about running for that seat, from Juliana Stratton, who Pritzker has endorsed, as has Tammy Duckworth already. Mm-hmm. There's Lauren Underwood, who I think is a favorite of yours, but
that's my favorite.
The question is, so will we still retain that seat, that House seat, in a kind of a purple district? There's also Robin Kelly. There's Alexei Janulius, who's the Secretary of State, and Raja Krishnamurti, who has a chunk of money too. Your thoughts on the potential candidates and who might be the next senator from Illinois?
Well, I think the leading candidates right now are Alexei Janulius, who still has, questions to answer about years ago when his bank went broke, giving bad loans to mobsters, to the mafia, and to crooks like Tony Resco. We could go into that whole history. Juliana Stratton has to be considered a favorite, a front runner right now, because of Pritzker's endorsement and Tammy's endorsement. I don't know if the Democratic National Committee will make an endorsement, but she is most likely to receive it if they make one. She has not a major record of accomplishment. The lieutenant governor's job is, as I described in one article, vacuous. You really don't do anything except wait to get promoted to governor, as happened to Pat Quinn, who got very, very lucky. Stratton, however, has been a champion of the criminal justice system, in speaking out. But she only served one term in the legislature, so she really didn't get a chance to define herself very strongly there. Nevertheless, she's a favorite. She would not necessarily have been picked to be lieutenant governor had the party not seen high potential for her, and someone they thought would be a good governor if she inherited the job. Krishnamurti, I think, of all the of the 3 Congress people who are running, has been banking money for years and years. A very ambitious guy, and he seems to be a media favorite. So it's an unforgettable name, no matter how you pronounce it. And so he's going to be right up there. It's hard to say who the public sees and who they throw away. Robin Kelly actually was made head of the party for a brief while until they asked her to step down because she was not permitted, as a congresswoman, she couldn't raise money for that. She's got a very good progressive record. The party line is generally progressive. None of these people would be rogue Democrats. Nothing near a mansion. They're all, I would say, in the generally liberal to progressive arena. So no matter who wins, we don't have any potential disasters.
Don, do you have any thoughts on Frerick, who I think that's his name? He's our treasurer, big, tall guy, went to Yale. I think he was an athlete.
Frears, yeah. He's been a solid performer also, but in a very low-key job. Nobody knows what the treasurer does. They say, did you like, what kind of job is he doing as treasurer? Fine. He hasn't stolen any money. There have been no catastrophes. But once again, a very decent guy, and his Facebook postings show him to be progressive as any of the rest of them. But I don't see him rising for any reason. There's so many, so much power and money out there for two or three candidates. So we'll see. Lauren, the reason I'm so entranced with Lauren Underwood is that she was able to, years ago, flip a nearly all-white, strongly Republican district as a black woman winning a primary first and then winning not comfortably, but by a few points and staying there. And now, no, since she has come in there, the district, the district was reconfigured to make it more comfortable for her. So if she, unfortunately, should lose and not become the senator, the seat would probably still remain Democratic. So, and I think, needless to say, that whoever wins the primary is tantamount to winning the seat itself. There's just too many Democrats, and unless something awful happens, like to Janulius 12 years ago or so, whenever it was, when the stench around that bank scandal took him down, and we got a Republican named Kirk who served one term. But otherwise, I think we can say that the winner of this primary will be the next senator. Who will replace him as number two is not decided by the people of Illinois, but by the Senate itself.
Well, let's move it a little closer to home. And right after Durbin announced that he was not going to run for another term, we heard just kind of mentioned afterthought on public radio that Jane Schakowsky in a month was going to announce that she's not going to run. And, Jan's been a longtime favorite, a really solid progressive, recently challenged by some influencer who was going to run. I can't remember or pronounce her name.
No, not an unpronounceable name for sure.
She got a lot of press all of a sudden, and since Jan is not running, I definitely am looking for someone besides that to root for. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this. I think it's the 9th Congressional District. I could be wrong, but I think that's what it is. And Jan Schakowsky, now that she's going to step down.
Well, she will certainly be a loss. She's been one of the most valuable members of the House. She's made herself a national standout, which is very difficult. You got hundreds of competitive people, including people in your own party. She doesn't get on the air as much as Krishnamurthy does, who seems to be a media favorite. But I don't know who of a lot of progressive people in that district. I don't know anyone who, other than this unpronounceable woman, has expressed interest in succeeding her. Nobody wants to be the person who tries to challenge somebody as popular as she. The only issue that might rise up there, I don't know whether it will be whether the seat will continue to be Jewish. Remember, it's a seat that was long held by Sidney Yates,
right,
and was considered, quote, the Jewish seat in the city.
Right, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that still plays. There's still a lot of progressive Jewish people in the district, but I don't know.
Well, that can become a controversy too, But we've got a Jewish governor who may be running for president. We may have as many as 3 Jewish people running for president. The governor of Pennsylvania, the governor of Illinois, quite possibly somebody like Adam Schiff, who would be formidable. So that's going to be a coming issue, considering all the discussion of anti-Semitism and how that might play out in a Democratic primary or in a general election. But I really can't speak to potential successors if, as expected, she says she's not going to run. All I can do is mourn the loss and congratulate her for many years of great service and a very, very strong progressive congresswoman.
Well done. We're running out of time. I was going to ask you real quick. I can give you 30 seconds on the status of our mayor. Where do you think he's at?
He's a loser. I don't see any way he can be reelected. He may try to rehab himself a bit, but nobody comes back from rankings like he's got. Even from his own progressive allies realize that he's over his head. He is not an evil person by any means, but and I agree with many of his progressive goals, but he simply can't govern. We just got a guy who's scared right now. He is way over his head, and he knows it, which is what makes it keep getting worse and worse.
Michael James, back at you. Here down in central Illinois, driving around, having a good time. I hope you enjoyed the interviews that Hal put together. We want you to continue to support our show by listening, sharing information, and even a donation now and then always helps. And we'll be back next week with some good, lively guests. Thanks for tuning in, and keep doing good in the world. The world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people.
Are you doing the best you can?
Thank you for watching the Live from the Heartland show. New episodes air every Friday beginning at 9 a.m. Central Time. Episodes air each following Thursday on CAN TV, 9 p.m. in Sweet Home Chicago on Channel 21, or streaming everywhere else at cantv.org. Audio episodes go live on WLUW each Saturday, 9 a.m. on the left end of your dial at 88.7 FM, or streaming everywhere worldwide at WLUW.org. They're available on Apple and Spotify podcasts by looking up Live from the Heartland on either platform, and are also broadcast on Lumpin' Radio each Friday at 9 a.m. on 105.5 FM and streaming at lumpinradio.com. I'm Michael James, and I'm glad to have been your host. Until next time, remember, do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people. Over and out.
Come to limb. Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing